Om Namah Shivaya.
Shivaya.
Om
Om
Sahana Bhavatu Sahana
Sahana
Bhunaktu
Bhunaktu
Sahaviryam Karavavahai
Sahaviryam Tejasvinavadhi
Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavit Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Well, a fantastic puja to start the new year with. Thank you very much, Anant Shivacharya. Interesting. Today is also the monthly Nataraja Abhishekam. Today is also Ardra Nakshatra, and that means we have our Nataraja Abhishekam starting in an hour and a half. So we get double blessings coming today. Unfortunately, we can't live stream it because we can't photograph Nataraja because of our own rules. So I have to tune in, not just virtually, but tune in mentally. So, starting a little late. Share the screen. Okay, you should be seeing Climbing the Ladder of Consciousness.
Yes.
Very good. Oh, we're continuing our climb. We haven't got to the top yet. This one is part 6. So I'll just give a very short introduction. We all have the introduction memorized by now. Human consciousness can be thought of as a ladder with 14 rungs. And a really useful concept for understanding that is the Hindu chakra system. So we have 7 higher chakras called principal ones. And then we have 7 lower chakras, seats of instinctive consciousness, which gives us 14 in all. There's more text than I'm reading, so the slide is behind. So we know the 7 lower ones, and the ones we're concerned with there are the top ones of the 7 lower ones. The bottom ones don't apply to people that are interested in religion and spirituality. And then, equally important is the higher ones, all the way from memory up to illumination. And as I mentioned, it's every soul is gradually climbing the same ladder of consciousness, either consciously or unconsciously. Even people that have no interest in religion and spirituality are still climbing the ladder. It's just not, they don't know it. But it automatically happens to all of us. And it's the same pattern. Therefore, wise Hindus, in understanding their own pattern and that of a few other people, can understand everyone's pattern because it's basically the same. So as I mentioned before, the modern teachers, not all of them, but a lot of them, just focus on stimulating the higher chakras. Easier to sell tickets to a seminar than closing the lower ones. So I have a new graphic for this. The covers of popular books on chakras on Amazon.com promote the idea that through meditation techniques given in the book, you can awaken your chakras and the Kundalini, develop your psychic abilities, clairvoyance, healing, and increase energy. So somehow something physical comes into everything that has to do with yoga. People are more conscious of the physical body than the other aspects of their nature. So all of that's well and good, but it's missing the point that any Hindu path is designed to bring us to moksha. First to God realization and then to moksha. So it's leaving out the really important purpose of the whole practice. We will begin with more thoughts from Gurudeva on the importance of starting with the basics. Previously we did the idea of the box of Dharma. The material is from the Merging with Shiva lesson, Foundations for Fruitful Yoga. But before we read the lesson, I wanted to share some terminology. Some of you may not be familiar with the way Gurudeva uses this terminology, therefore wouldn't quite understand it. A little terminology study here first. This eternal path is divided naturally into 4 separate categories. The Bhagavad Gita, the popular book which you all know from your studies in Vedanta and which has made Hindu philosophy well known in America, defines these as 4 separate non-progressive paths called Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So we all know that. In Agamic scripture, these are defined a little differently and are considered to be 4 stages of a progressive path. Termed Charya, Kriya, Yoga, and again, Jnana. What is the important difference between the Vedanta approach to the 4 yogas and the Siddhanta approach to the 4 padas? There's one difference that's really important. Whereas in Vedanta, you can choose to follow just one of the yogas, in Siddhanta, we need to pass through all 4 padas. A simple analogy will illustrate the difference. The goal is to walk across a shallow stream on a path of river rocks. Vedanta gives us 4 separate rock paths to choose from, one for each of the 4 yogas, all of which lead across the stream. So we have 4 choices. And most teachers say all 4 of them get to the other side. Siddhanta gives us only one path for crossing the river, which consists of 4 stones, Charya, Kriya, Yoga, and Jnana, which of course are the Sanskrit. Sarya, Kriya, Yogam, and Jnanam are the Tamil. According to the Agamic tradition, these 4 categories are like the natural sequence of the soul's evolutionary process. Much like the development of a butterfly from egg to larva, from larva to caterpillar, from caterpillar to pupa, and then the final metamorphosis from pupa to butterfly. Every butterfly, without exception, will follow this pattern of development, and every soul will mature through Charya to Kriya, through Kriya to Yoga, and into Jnana. Charya or Karma Yoga may be simply defined as service. So Charya and Karma Yoga aren't 100% the same, but it's the basic idea. Is the dominant practice in Charya is Karma Yoga. Kriya or Bhakti Yoga is devotion. Yoga or Raja Yoga is meditation. And Jnana is the state of wisdom reached toward the end of the path as the result of God realization and the subsequent enlivened Kundalini and unfoldment of the chakras through the practices of yoga. The soul does not move quickly from one stage to another. It is a deliberate process, and within each stage there exist vast libraries of knowledge containing the sum of thousands of years of teachings, unraveling that particular experiential vista. So again, the idea that we don't move quickly is being emphasized here. One more term we need to know is one that was coined by Gurudeva, Anavamarga. You won't find it anywhere else. It is the path of ignorance, the path of egoity, separateness, self-indulgence, self-interest, and selfishness. And that's basically the marga that we're on before we enter Charya. So now we got a terminology. We're going to the lesson. Many Hindu teachers in the West teach purely Advaitic meditation with no theism or religious practice. But most who have come to the West from India were raised in Hindu homes. They have within them a firm religious cultural foundation for yoga. Many do not pass the religious culture on to their Western devotees. However, in an Orthodox Hindu community, they would most likely teach in a more traditional way. Advaita philosophy is appealing to the Westerner. It does not require a change in lifestyle. The non-dual Advaita-based meditations do bring the devotees out of the conscious mind, but more often than not lead them into the subconscious. It is here within the subconscious that unresolved problems with family and one's personal ego begin to appear. Without a proper religious cultural background and traditional Hindu belief, these problems are difficult to handle. This turmoil is certainly not the purpose of Advaitic meditations, but it is a byproduct. So you may know individuals who've gone through that. They take up their practice of meditation, and then after a while they drop it. So why they've dropped it is they've ended up in the subconscious. And they're seeing problems they forgot they had. So they don't want to remember those problems, so they stop meditating. So this is my illustration I'm inserting. Imagine a pond of water with gold nuggets at the bottom. If either the surface of the pond has ripples due to a wind, or the pond itself is cloudy due to the presence of mud, the gold nuggets at the bottom of the pond cannot be seen from above. The ripples on the surface represent an active intellectual mind. The cloudy water represents the impurities in the subconscious mind, and the gold nuggets at the bottom represent our soul nature. The idea is that to experience our soul nature and its oneness with God, we need to pass through the subconscious mind. It needs to be purified in order for us to do so. So that's one of the key teachings that, again, is left out. Though it's there in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras in a few places. He uses the word samskaras for subconscious mind, changing the samskaras. And that takes a little time. So that's one reason the process of meditation takes time before it starts working right. Back to the merging with Shiva lesson. The wise guru trains his devotees in traditional Hindu culture and values and teaches the beginning yogas, as well as temple protocol, music, the arts, and dance. All these should be mastered to build a proper subconscious foundation within the mind. Karma yoga and bhakti yoga are the necessary prelude to the higher philosophies and practices. Group meditation is all right, as the group can really help the individual, as does the individual help the group. Intense meditation, however, awakens the samskaras, the impressions of the past, and intensifies the prarabdha karmas, bringing them into manifestation before their time. It has a greenhouse effect. No one should perform intensive meditation alone until he or she can serve selflessly and accept. Praise and blame and criticism without complaint or resentment, but with a sweet smile. So that ability is a byproduct of seva, karma yoga slash charya. We do that enough and we end up with this ability to accept praise and blame and criticism without complaint or resentment. Only when a devotee has reached this stage is he or she firmly on the Kriya Marga, which will lead quite naturally to the Yoga Marga. And finally, Raja Yoga and other kinds of more refined, intensive sadhanas can safely be performed. These will clean up the karmas of the past without mental pain, once the proper foundation has been set within the mind and character of the devotee. The progressive sadhanas of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and then Raja Yoga, or Charya, Kriya, and Yoga, are like clearing a path of its stones. First, you remove the big stones. Then you walk back along the path. You still see big stones, but they are half the size as the first ones that were removed. And you remove these as well. Then you walk back along the path and remove more stones that stand out as large, and on, till the path is clear. It is a refinement process. The seeker on the path has to be soft, pliable, easy to get along with, as well as firm-minded. Therefore, bhakti, which is love in action, is a necessary prerequisite to success on the Sanmarga, the straight path to God, toward merger with Shiva. All kinds of yogic techniques can be practiced, but they hold no fruitful rewards for those who are not firm-minded and not strong in the essential virtues. The prideful, antagonistic, and difficult to get along with people must soften their hearts. This is done through bhakti and karma yoga. These practices alone will free the devotee from the anava marga, the path of building up and keeping the personal ego strong. The anava marga is a difficult path to leave for the sanmarga, but the results on the sanmarga are so much more rewarding in the long run. It is often postulated by certain Indian schools of thought that once you reach a certain stage, bhakti should be set aside because it is dual by nature. That's what theism means, dual by nature. But a devotee arriving into a high state of consciousness does not give up his love for God and the gods. His devotion does not stop. Rather, it becomes more intense. He does not stop eating, relating to family, friends, and other devotees. These are all dual things too. Yes, it is true that some teachers preach this doctrine, but to avoid the Charya Marga, having perhaps never been on it, and say, I am on a greater and much higher one, I don't have to do that, is another philosophy, not ours. In Siddhanta, the margas are progressive stages of character building. They are a foundation for good character, which is built on bhakti. Proper habit patterns created through the daily sadhanas of karma yoga and bhakti yoga lay this foundation within the mind, body, and emotions. In case a devotee fails in pursuit of the higher yogas, he will always have his success on the Charya Marga to rely upon. For someone to say, I now intellectually understand the Vedas and do not need to express love and devotion is sad indeed. One who would really realize the truth of the Vedas would never say this. Gurudeva gives a strong warning on avoiding intensifying the lower forces. For individuals who are prone to anger, jealousy, contempt, and retaliation, they should abstain from any of the yogas of japa or exploratory meditation. These will only intensify and prananize, which means energize, the lower chakras that give rise to demonic forces. Rather, they should perform the always healing Vasanada Tantra, journaling, and confine themselves to karma yoga, such as cleaning in and around the temple and picking flowers for the pujas. These simple acts of charya are recommended but should not be extended to intense worship. Then and only then their life will be in perspective with the philosophy of Sanatana Dharma and begin to become one with Shiva's perfect universe. Brahmadvara, the door to the 7 chakras below the Muladhara, will then be sealed off as their experiential patterns settle into the traditional perspective of how life should be and each individual should behave within it. So we have one final quote, which serves as a summary of Gurudeva's perspective that we've been talking about. In the stages of Charya and Kriya, the deep-seated impurities of the mind are cleansed, as past karmas are resolved, and a foundation laid for the third stage on the divine path, that of yoga. Yoga is a very advanced science. It cannot be sustained except by the soul that has unfolded into the fullness of Charya and Kriya and maintains the qualities of service and devotion as meditation is pursued. The devotee who has served God well now embarks upon finding union with God in his sanctum within. He remains enveloped in the darshan of the personal Lord he carefully cultivated during Charya and Kriya, and on the power of that darshan he is drawn within by the primal soul himself to rarefied states of consciousness and the stillness of meditation. Very nice. So we have a quick review of the practices mentioned so far in the last Zoom satsangs, as well as today's. So our first one is accept that actions have consequences. So that's the only practice we gave for those who are in the lowest of the 14 chakras. Learning that every action eventually will have a consequence, not necessarily immediately, but sooner or later. Certain consequences are inevitable for certain actions. For the rest of us, living up higher, we looked at virtuous and dutiful living, which is Dharma, and specifically we looked at applying Dharma to your life in 5 ways. Then we looked briefly at increasing control over anger. And then today we added a foundation of practicing the Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga disciplines of the Charya and Kriya Padas. So that's our part 1. Next we have some additional material on the nature of anger. Non-injury and anger are closely related. There is a tendency to respond to challenging situations by becoming upset, angry, and finally harming others with our fists or our words. Therefore, understanding and controlling anger is an important part of practicing ahimsa. Chapter 33 of the Tirukkural is entitled Avoidance of Anger. It is, in fact, the chapter that precedes ahimsa, non-injury, which shows that to successfully practice nonviolence, we need to control anger. Here are 2 verses from this chapter. Forget anger toward all who have offended you, for it gives rise to teeming troubles. That's for sure. Anger kills the face's smile and the heart's joy. Does there exist a greater enemy than one's own anger? So that's interesting. Generally, we think that what takes away the face's smile and the heart's joy is somebody else. But Trudavalavar is pointing out, no, you yourself do that when you get angry. Don't need anybody else to take it away. Oh, we have a story. Hard to witness anger in the monastery since it's such a controlled environment. However, a few years ago, which was many years ago now, there was an opportunity for first-hand observation, which was when 2 carpenters were building a house next door to the monastery. So this went on for many, many months. One of the carpenters was more prone to anger than the other. Every few minutes, when something didn't work right, he would start loudly swearing at length. The house was that close to us. You could hear it. And then about once a week, there would be a huge argument, and he would stomp off the job and drive away. It was definitely a very interesting study in anger and human nature. And what was making him angry, of course, is when something didn't work right. He hit his finger with his hammer, or sawed a board too short and had to throw it away. Oh, it's a common cause of anger, that when what we want to have happen, what our willpower is pushing to have happen, doesn't manifest. So a thwarted will gives rise to anger. And one of the reasons for this is every other chakra is tied together. So we have willpower, which is the third, which is tied to memory, which is the first, which is tied to anger, which is the second one below. So anger, memory, willpower are all tied together. People's natures are quite different in their tendency to anger. Some are usually calm, but occasionally flare up. They fit the definition of anger of losing one's temper, where temper refers to composure, calmness of mind. Others anger quite easily and fit the definition of anger of possessing a temper, where temper means angers easily. So it's a very interesting word in English. Basically, if you possess a temper or you lose your temper, it means the same thing. You're getting angry. Unusual. Then there are people who are quite selective in those they get angry with, perhaps just their spouse. Gurudeva makes an interesting comment on anger in stating that anger is the most difficult fault for people to overcome because it comes in so many different forms: pouting, long silences, shouting, yelling, swearing, and more. Something you probably never thought about. Gurudeva continues by listing the 8 forms of anger from the book Angry All the Time. These are called the 8 rungs on the ladder of violence. What are the 8 forms of anger? See how many you can think of or remember if you've read it. Give a minute for that. The book lists sneaky anger, the cold shoulder, blaming and shaming, swearing, screaming, and yelling, demands and threats, chasing and holding, partly controlled violence, and blind rage. So we'll look at each in more detail. First rung, sneaky anger. You act and speak normally, but purposely neglect to do certain tasks others have asked you to do, pretending that you forgot all about the duties. Example, a teenage boy upset with his father for firmly disciplining him retaliates with sneaky anger by chronically forgetting to do his household chores. Very sneaky. Second rung, the cold shoulder. You shun another person and make it clear you are mad about something. However, you absolutely refuse to let him or her know what it is. Example, a wife is upset with her husband for working late and, rather than talk the issue through, gives him the silent cold shoulder for the entire evening. Third rung, blaming and shaming. You fault others for something that happened and then tell them they are no good in order to make them feel shame. Example, an employee makes a simple mistake at work and her boss is upset. Rather than help resolve the problem, he points blame at her, demeaning and intimidating her with personal criticisms. Fourth rung, swearing, screaming, yelling. You lose control over your speech and scream and yell at others. Those who have a habit of swearing are most prone to this form of anger. Example, a teenage girl has admitted to a minor wrongdoing at school. Her teacher, known for his foul mouth, yells at her harshly, using cruel, out-of-control words to punish her. Fifth rung, demands and threats. You demand that others behave as you want them to, or threaten you will do something drastic if they don't, such as hurt them or yourself. Example, an argument between two business partners gets out of hand and reaches the point where the younger threatens to beat up his associate unless he gets his way. 6th rung, chasing and holding. You approach or pursue others and physically restrain them against their will and prevent them from leaving your presence. Example, a woman's fiancé has been accused of seeing another woman. Incensed, she follows him to work, grabs him desperately, and insists they talk about the problem right now. 7th rung, partially controlled violence. You physically strike someone for the purpose of forcing him or her to do what you want, but without losing control. Example, a young boy is caught stealing at a neighbor's home. The owner, outraged, confronts the boy and swats him several times with a stick, wrongly thinking that this will reform the errant youth. 8th rung, blind rage. You physically attack a person with total loss of control to the extent that when you return to normal consciousness, you may not even remember the incident. Example, a sassy teenager deliberately insults an overweight stranger. Instead of just scowling, the fiery man flies into a blind rage and beats him mercilessly. That's it for today. Again, happy Tamil New Year. Om. Om. Om.
Thank you, Satguru.
Thank
you, Swami.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, Satguru.
Thank
you,
you, Satguru.
Thank you, Holy
Thank you,
Satguru.
Satguruji.
Thank you, Sadhguru.
Thank you, Satguru.